welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun Cho. The United States is planning high-level face-to-face engagement with South Korea's caretaker government led by Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. Today we discuss whether South Korea can maintain foreign policy goals that align with those of the United States.
우리 정부는 굳건한 한미 동맹을 바탕으로 빈틈없는 안보 태세를 확립하고 있습니다.
It is important that the United States and Korea and Japan work together to deal with threats, any threats that China might pose, as well as, of course, the very real threat that the DPRK poses to all.
That brought the Koreans in, North Korea. Another man I get along with very well, I'm the only one that does.
In the studio with me, Mr. Richard Lawless, founding principal of NMV Consulting. Mr. Lawless was former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs and also served as Deputy Head of the U.S. delegation to the Beijing Six-Party Talks. Mr. Lawless has also spent 15 years as a clandestine services officer in the Central Intelligence Agency, where he specialized in nuclear proliferation issues. His recently published book, Hunting Nukes, addresses both South Korea and North Korea's nuclear programs. Also joining us, Dr. Michael O. Hanlon, Senior Fellow and Director of Research in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. He also serves as a member of the Defense Policy Board at the U.S. Department of Defense. He's the author of The Crisis on the Korean Peninsula. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Lawless, the State Department said the U.S.-ROK alliance is not alliance just between the presidents, but between the governments and the people, and stressing that the alliance is not impacted by the martial law declaration nor presidential impeachment. However, given that President Yoon was in lockstep with the United States in alliance, in cooperation with Japan, and guarding against China and North Korea, wouldn't the United States have mixed feelings? Reading between the lines, do you see grave concerns about the latest situation?
I think current policymakers and the policymakers that will come into the Trump administration are concerned about really two periods ahead. The immediate period could last several months, will last several months, is one of almost chaos, in the sense that the opposition party seems determined to disrupt as much as possible, even the current government, the president, serving President Han. And so I think we have an immediate period of disruption, which we're going to have to manage as best as we can as an alliance partner. And then beyond that, we know for sure that we're getting a progressive government. So this initial period of 2 months, 3 months, 4 months of disruption, we'll have to pay special attention to maintaining the relationship as best as we can, and hope that the interim government, the government of President Han, is able to keep stability during this transitional period. Then the question becomes, once the new government comes in, which will be a progressive government, how do we manage that relationship as well, which will also be a huge task for the United States.
So, Mr. Lawless, the opposition party is even threatening to impeach Prime Minister Han. Since Washington is expressing strong support to the Han government, do you think U.S.'s such strong support expression would impact the opposition's next moves?
I think it might, but you know, the opposition moves to us, here in the United States, appear to be totally self-serving and totally oriented toward moving the impeachment process along as quickly as possible, shortening the time. And to do that, I think disruption is the order of the day on the part of the Lee Jae-myung team. And they are disrupting the entire process in Korea and making it more difficult for the United States to maintain a stable relationship And by trying to impeach acting President Han at this time is very destructive, I think.
And Dr. Hanlon, will the current political instability in Korea impact the alliance deterrence against China and North Korea? The DoD says the combined defense posture remains strong, but isn't there concerns that with the absence of Yoon government, which aligned closely to Washington, and the empowerment of the opposition, which has been critical of Yoon's policies, wouldn't that lead to discord and rift between Washington and Seoul?
Well, it's fascinating. First of all, it's an honor to be on the show with Secretary Lawless and with you, as always. And I think this is a fraught moment, not only because of South Korean politics, but because of American politics. If I could just take a step back, in mid-November, I was in Tokyo at the so-called Mount Fuji Dialogue, an annual meeting there, and I spoke to, or asked a question in the forum of Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, who had spent so much of his energy the last 4 years working on the Japan-Korea-U.S. relationship, which has made great progress. And I asked him, this was before the problems in South Korea, but after the U.S. election. I said, is it going to be hard to maintain this tightening trilateral relationship with Donald Trump returning to the White House? Because Donald Trump has always been skeptical of the U.S.-Korea relationship. And Ambassador Emanuel had some thoughtful ideas there about the strong economic relationships that everybody stands to benefit from continuing, and intelligence sharing, et cetera. But now we see even more disruption perhaps in South Korea. But don't lose sight of the disruption in the United States, because again, if we go back to the Trump administration the first time, Congress, in a bipartisan way, decided to insist that U.S. troops not be cut in South Korea below 22,000, and they put that into law because they were afraid that Donald Trump might pull all of our forces out of Korea. And by the way, I don't even know constitutionally if that law is considered to be proper, if the Supreme Court would allow it, because the president is commander-in-chief. So it's a complicated issue that hasn't been fully resolved here. But I think President Yoon anticipated the kind of relationship he wanted to have with Trump, and he probably had watched Shinzo Abe in Japan and the relationship forged there. And now we have a whole new uncertainty. Regardless of exactly which South Korean winds up in the Blue House, we don't really know how they're going to get along with Donald Trump. And the personal relationship, I'm sorry to disagree a little bit with the Pentagon, it may matter more this time than it usually does with Trump coming in.
So you're expecting the trilateral cooperation to unravel pretty soon
No.
because of the change of leaderships in all three countries?
No, I'm glad you put it that way, so I can say, no, I don't expect it. I'm glad you provoked in that sense, because I think all bets are off. That's the point. We don't know.
Yes.
And Donald Trump may decide that this relationship is good, and he may wind up with someone he gets along with. And Korea may decide to double host nation support, and maybe Trump claims that as a victory, and that's enough. Or, triple it even. Korea can certainly afford that, and it wouldn't be a big problem. But a progressive in South Korea might not want to be seen as somehow capitulating to American ultimatums. So I have no idea where the dynamic will go.
The South Korea's opposition leader Lee Jae-myung is leading in polls for the next presidential elections, and you talked about it depends on whether the next South Korean leader really hit it off with President Trump. What do you think of Lee Jae-myung and his groups trying to rehabilitate their image to people in Washington that they do care about the alliance? Because Lee Jae-myung said that South Korea and the U.S. will evolve into an economic, comprehensive alliance that goes beyond blood alliance.
Well, I think most of us who believe in the alliance will welcome that sort of outreach and will be more than willing to develop a new relationship or to support a stronger U.S.-ROK alliance than Lee may have preferred before. But the question is Donald Trump. It's a very personalized kind of rule in the United States when Donald Trump is president. And so a lot of it's going to depend on whether Trump hits it off with whomever. And the rest of us, yes, believe in the alliance on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats. People are very, very supportive of the U.S.-ROK alliance in the foreign policy community. But that is not necessarily the key issue.
Lee Jae-myung and his party are not welcoming the joint military exercises or the stationing of the U.S. troops on the Korean Peninsula. Maybe they can hit it off there. Maybe they can find common grounds with President Trump there.
Well, I hope that doesn't mean we leave the peninsula. I mean, if in other words, there are good ways in which you could imagine this kind of energy going, and there are bad ways. One way that would be relatively harmless, in my opinion, is to scale back the big exercises. I've been a skeptic on the big exercises for a long time. As long as US-ROK alliance cooperation is strong and we can do small exercises together and the United States keeps a strong military presence on the peninsula, I think deterrence will be robust. But if we start pulling forces out or doubting our willingness to come to Korea's aid in the event of war, then that's dangerous. Even if Trump and the South Korean leader, whoever it may be, even if they agree on that, it could be a bad decision they make together. And I think it would be unfortunate.
Mr. Lawless, Lee Jae-myung in 2021 said pro-Japanese collaborators work with U.S. occupying forces to create Korea, calling United States occupying forces. And this year, Lee said, why bother China over Taiwan? And this is direct quote, just say xie xie.
Mm-hmm.
What concerns would Washington have with the change in leadership in Korea and the foreign policy direction?
Well, I think going back to Michael's comment, we have a three-way dynamic situation here. He was at the Fuji Dialogue. One of the subsets of the Fuji Dialogue in Japan was, from the Japanese side, they're very, very concerned about a progressive government or a return to a progressive government in the Republic of Korea, which is what is upon us right now. So we are concerned, the United States is concerned about the future of the Japan Republic of Korea relationship. We should be. And I think that, as mentioned by Michael again, a Trump presidency vis-a-vis the Korean Peninsula is highly unpredictable. And it is possible that Mr. Trump and Lee Jae-myung, or an Lee Jae-myung government, could find common ground on troop reduction, on a weakening of the alliance, an accommodation of North Korea, and an accommodation of China. And these factors coming together, I think, would bode extremely ill for the future of the alliance. But we are going to have to live with a new government, a progressive government, for 5 long years. And unfortunately, that will coincide with the unpredictability of a Trump administration determined to find common ground with North Korea. So all this is going to be going on at the same time. So we're in for a real ride over the next 6 to 12 months.
The Democratic Party is out to remake its image in Washington that they do care about the alliance. And Lee Jae-myung also mentioned along the lines in recent weeks. Back in August, you said you don't see any signs that Progressive Party is committed to the alliance in reality. Could you elaborate more on that?
I still believe that. I still believe that the Progressive Party would be willing to sacrifice the alliance or most of the alliance structure in return for its progressive policies vis-a-vis North Korea. And right now, you put it properly, the Lee Jae-myung team is trying to put the best face possible toward the Trump administration, reaching out to it, trying to convince them that they have changed their spots, if you will. You notice the Lee Jae-myung camp has not used the word occupying force for USFK over the last 6 to 8 months. They're being very careful about what they say. But I think their true intent goes back to that occupier mentality, and I think it has a recourse to an anti-Japanese feeling within many people in Korea. So as I say, I think we'll have to watch this very carefully, both in the near term and then in the longer term. It's going to be a difficult thing to manage for the Trump administration.
Would Washington be anticipating resurgence of strategic ambiguity coming from South Korea? And in which case would the United States reset its relationship with South Korea, strain relationship with South Korea, and stronger relationship with Japan, as we saw during the Moon Jae-in administration?
Well, remember, Republic of Korea is a sovereign state, and it has the right to make its own decision about its own future. So I look upon this as a situation where Korea is going to be telling us what it wants to do through the new government. And we will be reactive to that. And probably the Trump administration, because of its transactional nature, is going to be imposing some requirements on the Korean government in any respect. Michael mentioned a possible increase in the defense contribution, moving it to a full 3% or a 3.5% feature, 5% perhaps, of the defense budget as a percentage of GDP. And I think if that happens, it could provide a wedge, if you will, or a cause that would cause a fracturing sooner rather than later with the United States. So that's why I say we have to manage this relationship with this very progressive government very carefully.
Dr. Hanlon, President Yoon Suk-yeol cited 2 cases of Chinese nationals using drones to possibly spy U.S. aircraft carriers and the National Intelligence Service. How would the United States respond to such allegations? Does the United States also have concerns over Chinese malicious expansion of influence?
Yes, I'll come back to China in just a second if I could, but let me also comment on this issue of outreach to North Korea by a future progressive government and perhaps by Donald Trump. And personally, I don't have any qualms about trying, but I think it's important to keep in mind the proper sequence of events. If we draw down forces first and hope that will be a signal of goodwill, that's a mistake. That's dangerous. But if we're willing to talk about a whole different kind of vision for the future of the Korean Peninsula, and Kim Jong-un wants to have that conversation, and he's prepared to take steps to reassure us about his nuclear disarmament, among other things, then I think the dialogue is fine. But I would simply counsel Korean friends that if they ask us to leave, and we pull our forces off, I don't think we're coming back. So I don't think you can take the gamble, and then when the crisis occurs, then ask the United States to change its mind. The whole reason we stayed after the Korean War was so that the United States and the Republic of Korea could together build robust defense that would serve to prevent another war. And that succeeded for 3/4 of a century. And I think we would be mistaken to throw the dice because don't forget, even though South Korea, in my opinion, has one of the 5 best militaries in the world and much better than North Korea conventionally, it's Kim Jong-un who has the nuclear weapons. So if we leave, we're no longer committed. Kim Jong-un may try to use nuclear bluster or brinkmanship to force some kind of concessions from South Korea. And then South Korea is all on its own. Someday it could have its own arsenal. I don't really favor that, but I would understand it. But in the short term, it would not. So we got to be very careful about the sequence by which we make any big new outreach efforts. That would just be a point I would want to emphasize. And I'll be brief on your question about China. The United States and China are going to keep spying on each other any way they can, as hard as they can, for years to come. And of course it will include drones. Of course it will include airplanes. Of course it will include submarines. Of course it will include satellites. That's the way that great powers behave, and it's not even necessarily all bad. Mr. Lawless has a great career in intelligence. I was on the CIA advisory board. I'm a huge admirer of what our intelligence community does, and I would expect China to want to know what we do and to develop its intelligence capabilities further. As long as it's done in a professional and safe way, it's not necessarily threatening.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Lawless, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that healthy and steady growth of bilateral relations is in the interest of both Seoul and Beijing. What is China's calculus at this point? And how will Washington respond to Beijing's attempts to recalibrate its relationship with South Korea?
Well, there's going to be a recalibration no matter what. And particularly, I think they will be very attuned to a progressive government in Korea that gives them the opportunity to do that, to return to the Moon Jae-in period, if you will, of let's call it the balance that the Moon Jae-in government attempted to structure with the Republic of Korea at the fulcrum, United States and Japan, United States and China at the 2 opposite ends of the teeter-totter. But I think the key issue here is if you look at North Korea declaration that North Korea is no longer determined and has given up reunification per se as a goal, that fits beautifully into the progressive mindset of basically creating a mirror image or a near mirror image Republic of Korea that accepts that reunification will not take place, and becomes a live and let live situation. That is highly desirable on the part of the people in Pyongyang, because they will have accomplished so much of their goal. So we have to take all these things into consideration. And the degree to which Mr. Trump and his team are not complicit, but facilitate such an arrangement on the peninsula could be very interesting. But as Michael says, it has to be done properly, and it has to be done in a structured way. And it has to be done in a way where we reassure the other people in the region, including Japan, that we've got a plan. My biggest concern is we go haphazardly into this new world of the Korean Peninsula and try to get something done too quickly without a concrete plan. We got burned with the Trump administration last time with that. It could happen again.
Dr. Hanlon, during the first press conference since the election, President Trump mentioned leaders of Japan and China and even Kim Jong-un, but didn't say anything about South Korea. And Mr. Lawless just touched upon that. Going into the new Trump era without being prepared, what should the leaders of South Korea, the main party or the opposition party, think about at this point before the inauguration of President Trump?
Well, that's a tall order to try to do something clear and signal very, cogently before the inauguration, which, as you know, is 1 month from right now. And so, in that sense, I think it's maybe, I would say don't try too hard in the sense of try to be pro-American to the extent possible, but also pro-Korean, and let time play out. Donald Trump doesn't spend 8 and 10 hours a day reading intelligence briefing books about different parts of the world, but he's a smart guy. So he takes in his information through the media, through social media, through meetings, and he has developed, you're right, he has developed a certain feel for Xi Jinping and for certain other leaders. He had a very good relationship with Shinzo Abe previously. So it's a personal style of diplomacy, and he does take in information, but in his own style, and not in a formal, structured, intelligence-based way. So I think he's not going to have a reading on Korea for a while. And the good news is he's smart and he will take in information. But to expect a Korean government now to know how to signal President Trump before Inauguration Day in the United States, I would just say keep it simple and try to be as supportive and appreciative of the alliance as possible, and then don't try to do too much.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Lawless, according to the U.S. Department of Defense, North Korean troops have suffered hundreds of casualties in Russia's Kursk region. If such losses continue, how would that impact North Korea's willingness and capability to support Russia in its war against Ukraine?
I think the North Korean leadership is determined to deliver on its commitments to Russia and to Mr. Putin. I believe they are perfectly willing to sacrifice another 10,000, 20,000 troops into that active combat. They're willing to take losses. Remember, they're being paid good hard cash for every North Korean soldier they ship to Russia, and they're being paid more cash for everyone that dies. So I think this is, you talk about transactional relationship, this is truly a transactional relationship between North Korea and Mr. Putin, and I would expect it to continue until that conflict is resolved.
And Dr. Hanlon, with such heavy casualties, would that raise the quid pro quo for Russia going beyond just hard currency? Would Russia be willing to supply advanced technology to North Korea compared to the beginning of the war?
I think the answer has to be, unfortunately, yes. We just don't know what technology and how open-ended the offer would be. Historically, as you know, the superpowers have not wanted to share technology with a lot of other countries, because even when we had a Cold War vis-a-vis the Soviet Union, we had a common interest in making sure that we had the bomb and most other countries did not, that we had good submarines and long-range missiles and most other countries did not. So Moscow and Washington could agree on that. And some of the logic may still continue. On the other hand, Putin is in a major war, and he considers himself already to be in a form of war against the United States already, even though it's not an active shooting war vis-a-vis the two countries. So I'm afraid that in the interest of getting North Korean help, he may be willing to do things we would not have considered likely before. I hope that does not extend to thermonuclear weapon design. I hope that does not extend to the most advanced submarine quieting technology. I hope that does not extend to re-entry vehicles for ICBMs, but I'm not sure.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Dr. Hanlon, Mr. Lawless, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Injin.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.